Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Before I get into this video, I'd like to ask you all to please leave a like or comment on my video, consider subscribing to my channel, and if you dislike the content, please leave a comment. Now, this video isn't going to be my most cheerful video. I'm just going to do a quick analysis on where I lost my cyclone. Now, this is something which a lot of players are going to go through, and I'm actually going to try and keep it as chilled as possible. Now, here are all the things which I'm going to divide this into a pros and cons within this whole situation. It is going to be a little bit salty, so please bear in mind that some of my comments aren't really going to be fair on people. So let's go through everything. So I was taken on by a 10-man fleet and I was doing PvE at the time, which is really not something which you would expect. The reason is one of the encounters for a Galante mission makes you cross Nullsec to get there quickly. Now, is this your fair? No, it's not. The fact that it goes through a Nullsec instead of you having to do the Nullsec and do the safe route, which would take you 20 jumps around, is not really fair to give you extra jumps in any way to do the PvE content. PvE content as it stands is low reward and extremely long distances, so it's already very time consuming. The fact that it runs through Nullsec is one of the most annoying factors for completing Sweet Poison. The mission itself is way under on its ISK reward. At 50 million ISK, it's weaker than a T8 reward from the same faction. It should have 100 to 200 million ISK reward on it. And the fact that getting to this mission crosses Nullsec says that this mission should have a massive reward. You should be expecting the 200 million ISK as your balance for that mission completion. Now, I am going to be going through one or two aspects of this whole PvP combat that I went through, and I'm going to be criticizing the devs heavily in this year for a lot of things they didn't plan out properly. So, number one, when they first started the game, we had autopilot immunity. Now, they removed it because of players running away from PvP battles with it to get immunity from warp disruptors. This is a situation where the autopilot was needed for PvE but wasn't available with the protection due to the changes they made. And look at my ship, and you can definitely say that I wasn't going for PvP. There you go. The fact that I also wasn't in a fleet in this region says that I wasn't going for PvP. And overall, the amount of damage that I did do was really good. The fact that they had me with the 13 scrambler strength, as you can see under my name, warp scrambler strength was 13. That's how far they had me. The total damage they had to do was 54,510. That's just to defeat my ship, which has 32 overall defense. That says that my ship was really tough in this combat. And the fact that I hammered at them and they got away from me was something that made a big difference. Now, I think they need to add a penalty for pulling someone out of warp at a gate. Not warp, out of autopilot at a gate. Like no warping or micro warp drives when you do that to a player. Because the fact that a player is autopiloting through the area and you pulling them out of autopilot means you were initiating the fight. So if you're disrupting a player in autopilot, you shouldn't be able to micro warp drive or warp drive away. That means you are forced to stay in combat once you've engaged into it. Now, I believe that should have like a 5-minute crime timer, like the crime timers in high sec and low sec, and it will be something fair for a PvE player, because even though PvE players may not have the most amount of damage to deal, when someone does this to you, say for example, considering my PvE build over here, they weren't really going to get through my shield if I had taken them on fair and square without them warping away. Had I taken them on fair and square, the 3 battle cruisers would have been gone before they even got halfway through my shield, and the damage would have been too low to get through the rest of my shield, considering my recovery was right at the top of the range for this vessel. And with all of that being said, had I had more time to fight them, I most probably would have destroyed all of their vessels, including the Daredevil. Wait, let me go through their vessels. As you can see, Stabber, Caracal, Now, the fact that you can do this to a player in PvE says that it is unfair, because a PvE player is never going to be able to combat your PvP style, because PvP and PvE have distinctly different fitting sets to play them. And considering the region and the PvE event that's moving through this region being from Galante, the only thing you're going to want to continue having is an Acolyte battery. The reason for it is the Acolyte capacitor battery gives you more power against newts, which is something that Galante love to use against you when they are elite. So the fact that this is the way that it moves in each sector says that if you are playing the best for PvE, you can't fight the PvP battle. So they either need to make some kind of protection for PvE players, because this is absolutely unfair, especially running through PvE zones. If your end zone is in PvE, like a high sec or into a mission or anything like that, you should be able to engage that negative crime timer on all vessels fighting you. That means they either scatter away from you and allow you to warp away, or they're going to keep up the combat with you and it's going to be a fair fight. Like this, it wasn't a fair fight. I never stood a chance of fighting back. There wasn't even an opportunity for me to destroy them and get away from this entire combat. They just kept warping away and re-warping back in at a longer distance so that they could damage me from afar instead of sitting up close and taking me on in fair combat. And that is the problem with the whole thing. The devs need to be thinking about this. Your game may be PvP and PvE orientated, but the PvE factor needs to be taken into consideration. The original aspect of defending autopilot was fair. Maybe initiating autopilot in the start shouldn't have protection, so your first 30 seconds of PvE has no warp stabilization or warp disruptor immunity, but once warp is engaged, immunity is right through the entire path. Especially with interdiction spheres coming in, you'll need to be thinking about this, because you'll have PvE crossing through nullsec, and that is unfair. You'll either need to move the region all the way out, or you need to take out that region as nullsec. You need to put it as low sec instead, because it is a route for PvE battle. Or you can take all your PvE and squash them into high sec and make it easier for the PvE players. Remember, PvE is not as simple as PvP. PvP is just a cheap shot at taking someone who isn't there and beating them. And that is exactly what these guys were looking for. They were looking for inactive players to take on. And when I started fighting back, they started running away. But because they could run away and come back, they used that to their advantage. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that is overall a bad thing in the game. This is just my review over the PvP process against PvE players. The PvP aspect of the game is absolutely a part of the game. The PvE aspect is also a part of the game. So PvP and PvE need to have two separate systems of immunity. You need to be able to select which missions you are doing, and if you are heading towards a fleeting ratting fleet against anomalies in nullsec, yeah, you can't have that immunity. But if you're running into a low sec area, you definitely need that immunity. They need to work on it. They need to really, really work up their protection, because it's the only way that these PvP players are really making a lot of ISK. They run cheap, inexpensive builds to reduce cost, and they try and attack expensive, heavy builds for PvE. And that is the overall negative in this whole situation. I'm really, really upset at the fact that they managed to pull me out. I'm not really so upset that I lost the vessel. I'll replace it in about a week or two, but it does set me back a lot overall. I was about to start upping my game into T8 combat. I am going to go into T8 combat anyway, but I need to do T10 combat for a few days to make the ISK. So overall, what I'm saying for this whole situation, let me just calm down a bit. It is making me a bit angry, the fact that I was playing PvE and I got PvP'd. Number one, PvE needs more immunity. The fact that you made the gates super powerful in all PvE located areas means that these gates should have been part of it. It crosses between two PvE reference points all PvE reference points should be taken as the shortest possible directions from any and all PvE routes. That means if you put a PvE encounter at 0, and it crosses one nullsec gate, that nullsec gate should be protected under the lowsec rules, and it shouldn't be put into the nullsec, because then you are making it unfair on the PvE player who has to use that route in order to go to the next mission. Remember, your PvE players are at a massive disadvantage due to range that they play. Your PvP players have all the advantage right now, and you can't keep giving it to them over and over again. Yes, they do make up a big amount of the game, but if the PvE side of the game crashes, you will have a massive negative in terms of the overall performance. A damage like this is something that could make a normal player quit the game. Considering that this ship is built up over 3 weeks for me, if I was a regular player who couldn't up my ISK reward every day, I most probably would quit. But the other thing is, I can up my ISK reward and I can make 80 million a day. That means 5 days for me to actually complete this entire set. It is going to be absolutely frustrating. It's going to get me a lot of negative in terms of amount of time. I lose more time playing the game in this way, and it is purely a dev mistake. They took off that protection from the autopilot. The autopilot protection needs to be re-added into the game because of interdiction spheres coming up as well. It's something they have to consider. I never thought of it being this bad, and the interdiction sphere needs to disrupt the players who initiate it. So the fleet who initiates it mustn't be able to use micro warp drives and not disruptors, mustn't be able to use micro warp drives and warp away from the area. If they can use warp core optimizers, make the figure on them double the penalty or something like that there, so that they can't run away. It's unfair on the unsuspecting player, especially since you'll have left it in a PvE area. This is one of the worst things that you'll have done. Y'all can double check the route. That is Syndicate. Let's see, FDMLJ. I was using the route moving through Z6NQ6 through Syndicate. The other region which is part of this whole situation would be, let's see, if I'm moving through Nullsec, where was I going to? ANNAN. It's one of those systems, and I was moving along the route from Vesper, which is a zero point 0.1 sector, that's a low sec. I was moving all the way into a mission. Now, considering that I took 36 jumps, it is 36 jumps on the fastest route. It's almost 50 jumps on a safe route. You all need to reconsider it. PvE cannot waste one whole hour just to get to a fleet location. You'll need to either reduce the distances and put all PvE in one small area, or you'll need to really think about adding protection back to these vessels, or you'll need to reallocate those sectors to higher secs, because Vesper, which is now 0.1, used to be a negative null sec. You'll need to reallocate all of those regions, just like what y'all did to that previous null sec, along all of these routes in Syndicate. So all of these gates that are on the edge should be made safe for players to pass through. And that will prevent people from doing things like this here. And honestly, you'll need a better system to regulate PvP. PvP is too much of a free-for-all, especially since they gain all the edge by being prepared to take on players. While players are taking on PvE missions, it really doesn't make it a fair overall game. So that's my message basically in this year. And I most probably will be back up in a cyclone in a week, and hopefully I'll take these guys on again, but this time with the with the warp core stabilizer and a disruptor on my ship to teach them a good lesson. So thank you all for watching. Have a good day.